All right, it's working. So when Donigan is going to be back, we're going to be live. Okay. Good for you, Mike?
I'm sorry? Yes, we're going to be live.
Yeah, now we are live on YouTube.
Oh my God. You mean even the most casual and incidental comment could be like eternal? You mean we've entered the moment of eternity itself?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
You can hear me again. I'm back. Everything's fine? Yeah, okay. All right, good.
Perfect.
Okay.
And as I was saying to Mike, now we're live on YouTube, so it's whenever you're ready.
We'll start right at 7 o'clock, yes?
Yeah.
In ICE, my clock says we're 4 minutes away.
Mine too, 6:56. Yeah.
Okay. Donigan, you don't want to make a dramatic entrance at like 7:03?
No.
No?
No.
Oh.
Well, I could, you could, I could go rush onto the screen or something.
That would be nice. You could just cover the camera like this.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, I'll cover
and then you could just appear at 7:03.
Yeah, just like this at 7.
Yeah, great.
You could do the intro with my hand over, all right? And
that
then
would be fantastic.
And that'll be on the YouTube, all right? And then I just go. Fit.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Like that would be.
How's that?
I think it's
silly like that.
Beautiful.
Well,
we need some drama.
Well, we do. Maybe we will find some by accident, but which we may not like, Mike. I don't know, but I think we just go. The two of us, see what happens.
Okay.
I know you have a plan, and so do I.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it's not as good as your plan.
I'm sure it's much better.
No, I don't know.
You have the advantage of knowing everything that I'm going to say.
Well, maybe I do. We'll see.
I'm just going to read it right off the teleprompter here.
Okay.
And
right.
You'll read it off the teleprompter of your memory.
Okay. All right.
How would that be?
That's fine.
Great.
Okay.
In 2 minutes.
Yep. 2 minutes. I've got 6:58 and countdown. Yep, that's right. No.
I'll just download some more tracks from SoundCloud while we're waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, got that one. As you probably know, it was International Dawn Chorus Day a couple of days ago. And so my SoundCloud feed is filled with dozens of tracks of birds. They seem to be very active at dawn. 1 minute to go.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to cover me. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where's my covering gone? Oh my God, I feel almost. Oh, that's a bit better. Okay. It must be 7 o'clock, at least in Toronto. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a special presentation from Videograph, Montreal's video art distributor. Today we're going to have a chit-chat with movie artist Donigan Cumming. The ghost in this machine is Sammy Zenderudy. My name is Mike Hoolboom, and Marion Levesque is also with us to play guitar and interpret your dreams. Like all artist-run centers, we're committed to the illusion of democracy. So we'll provide 15 minutes of freedom at the end of this hour-long podcast for your questions and thoughts. Please feel free to type them into the chat section. The hope of every video vlogger that our work will go viral. But now it seems that the virus has found everyone. In a traditional documentary, isn't this the beginning of a traditional documentary? It's usual to have a number of experts step up and tell us, why should we be watching this? Why should I spend my time here? So Donigan Cumming, he's been making photographs and videotapes for the last 4 decades. He's made 14 books, 26 videotapes, too many photos to count. Books and monographs are continuing to be written about him. He's had big shows in fancy galleries around the world, as well as being a film festival staple. And yet, he remains something of an outsider. Perhaps it's because of his subject matter, which remains stubbornly rooted in Montreal's white underclass, the undercommons, as Fred Moten named it. Poorly housed, economically disabled, struggling with addiction, with chronic health issues, with the question of care, survival, and community. How to take the next step, how to make a portrait of these friends, these rooms, all of this living and dying. I want to get to these questions, but first I'd like to ask some background questions. If that's okay with you, Donigan, because in all your work, you don't stand apart as a silent witness. You aren't building your silver masterpieces at one remove. Instead, you're always part of the picture. And this seems a necessary part of your documentary ethics. So if it's all right, I'd like to begin with a few queries about your own journeys. Donigan Cumming.
All right, Mike.
Can you appear?
Hi. Hello, Mike. Yes,
here
I'm
you
here. I'm here now.
You were born in the United States.
Mhm.
You were born in the United States, but have now lived for decades in Canada. Why did you come?
Well, I came because of the American War in Vietnam in the early 70s. And in fact, one of the
You were a draft
videos
dodger
on the program. I don't call myself that. I was a war resistor. I refused the war. It's different. It's different. The definition of those terms is more complicated than that phrase you use, captures. I don't use it for myself.
You were part of a generation of young, hip, educated, politically savvy Americans who crossed the border and remade Canadian politics and culture. Some estimate it was around 40,000 people. The Canadian-US border was a very different place then. This country wasn't simply an extension of the war machine. Was it easy to make the crossing? Was it hard?
Well, no. Technically, I bought a suit and I got on a plane and I flew to Canada. Emotionally, it was more complicated than that. It made me an exile, and I think I still carry that with me. I was very angry at the United States at that time, and I didn't want to become a killer for them, and I carried that frustration and anger into the work that I eventually did. And some aspects of it are still there. I think I'm angry about different things now. Old age, economic stress, the kind of taxing things that happen to individuals within any society.
Here in Toronto, there were entire neighborhoods that were taken up with folks that had just come over from America. Was it the same in Montreal?
It might have been, Mike. I'm not sure. I didn't have a lot to do with my with other people like myself when I came here. I'm not a big admirer of my generation, particularly. The older actors of conscience in the generation that preceded me were much more admirable characters to me. I'm thinking of people like the Berrigan brothers and Dellinger, Bayard Rustin, people like that. And Ouija, of course, My Dinner with Ouija, which is part of the program following this, is cast around a character who was a colleague of those people and began his life as a writer for the Catholic Worker in the late 40s and ended up protesting the Cold War and the McCarthy era. And I found Marty Corbin, who was the star of My Dinner with Ouija, an extremely engaging figure. And my relationship with him began with a long conversation, which became My Dinner with Ouija.
I wonder, let me just roll back for just a moment.
Sure.
You've named your early time in Canada as being like lost years, and that you became acquainted with the wonders and terrors of alcohol in those times. I know that we live in a culture where wandering is not encouraged, where not knowing is considered a deficiency, where acting without purpose or utility is considered, waste of time. But when I look back, I feel that a lot of the most important work that I've done as an artist or as a person was in this wasted time. It laid the foundation for much of what could happen later. I wonder if you could talk about those years, who you met, what you did, and possibly, I don't know if it's true, the relationship between that time and the work that you would do later in photography and video.
Well, there's a direct line back there. Wasted years doesn't really capture my attitude towards waste. I agree with you that waste is very provocative stuff. Wasted time is pregnant with promise. And I still feel that way. I met many of the people that I work with during that period of waste in quotes. And I was came up in an era that infected with the ideas of people like Marcel Duchamp, who really acquainted me with the thought that art had a great deal of chance and accident in it, but each of us has our own chance. That chance is personal.
Would you say it was a time where you were taking risks, the kind of risks that you would consider perhaps in this time, some decades later, like even unthinkable? How could I have done that? I don't know.
No, I didn't feel that way at the time. Certainly I feel I wasn't, when I look back on it, I was certainly lucky sometimes. But I was self-absorbed, and I had a direction I wanted to follow. I was clearly wanted to be what I was. I felt that those years in my 20s were a kind of research phase for me. And that I had a few years to get my balance, find out exactly how I wanted to proceed. And that's how I treated that time.
Could you talk about how you began the practice of photography, like where you might shoot, or what kind of subjects you were drawn to, and was the darkroom an important practice for you? And it's very different now, of course, but I think in that time, many photographers, it was a usual thing to work in darkrooms.
Yeah. I wasn't, when I first got involved with with photographing, I was probably in my late teens, and I didn't get to Canada till I was 22. And the first years I was a very enthusiastic photographer. If you gave me film and it was yours, I'd develop it. I'd print your pictures. I liked the whole thing. But that faded over time. And I never was, I lost that affection for the darkroom, and it was just a place where I worked. And I played a game with the darkroom in the end. It was just the paper backing off of film was thrown on the floor. When it reached my knees, I realized I was deeply engaged with what I was doing, and I was in the right place. So I had a kind of a Puritan relationship with my darkroom. I began taking pictures by accident, of course, when I was about 18. I was 19, actually. I was traveling. I was in a part of the world that was unstable. I met a photographer who I became the assistant of. I was given a camera with all the controls taped and put in a window above a square to photograph. None of that really infected me with a desire to be a photographer, but it was there.
Sorry, what does that mean? The taped and the photograph?
Oh, you tape it because I didn't know how to operate it. I didn't know how to operate it.
Okay.
So you tape the controls, you tape the speed, you tape the focus, you tape the f-stops, you tape it so I can't just, I was told to point it in a certain direction.
What kinds of things were the two of you shooting, for instance?
A flood in Florence. The Arno crested its banks, and I was in a window above a square that the Pope was visiting.
Ah, yes. Huh. Interesting. And then when you were back and you started, like in your 20s, when you're here and you're starting to make pictures or continuing to make pictures, like, were they mostly floods, landscapes, portraits?
No, I was, my focus in those days, and still to a large extent, is people. I photographed people. And I settled in a rooming house culture at that time, and I met all the people that were living next to me down the hall, and I photographed them. I began to photograph them.
I wanted to ask you about this gigantic project that you worked on called Reality. It's a real mouthful. Reality and Motive in Documentary Photography. So like a documentary project made of photographs in 3 parts, I believe, which is also looking at the entire practice of documentary photography. I wonder if you could speak about this reflexive relationship, your sometimes uneasy relation with the history of what's gone before you, and how you've taken up and sort of challenged that history to create your own practice in this project, Reality and Motive in Documentary Photography.
Well, perhaps maybe I could begin with the structure of Reality and Motive in Documentary Photography. It was in 3 parts. The first part was purposely shot within a supposed underclass in an urban environment, living in rooms and small apartments. The second part was shot in the suburbs with a middle and upper middle class subject matter. And the third was took certain people from both the first and second part and cast them as Elvis Presley fans. And all of this was put to. Why Elvis Presley?
Why the fiction in documentary?
Well, because I think that there's a certain element, there's a strong element of fiction in all documentary. And so what I put together was a theater of documentary that was, I hoped, I knew was very aware of itself. I cast people. I dealt with it as a theatrical production. So casting them as Elvis Presley fans was a twist on the first two sections.
And what were you looking for in the earlier casting, for instance?
Well, I was looking to, play against some of the icons of the documentary tradition. Madonna and Child, religious faith, elderly couples. I wanted a very broad demographic, children. I was looking to cast a net around a group of people that would address a lot of things that I felt were central to making a document or a group of photographs about people.
You wrote me once that Reality and Motive was all about unveiling the conceits and visual hooks used to create the icons of the documentary tradition. You've just named a couple, Madonna and Child, for instance. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about these visual hooks. When I hear that phrase, I hear a kind of that there's a trick at work, or that there's a machine that produces a reliable result. For instance, empathy, or a sort of the manufacture of certain kinds of emotions. I wonder if you could just elaborate on this question, the visual hooks that you were working or concerned about.
Let me start with two people that I admire. They didn't work this way at all, and I didn't think of myself as working that way. Ouija, who is the ghostly figure behind My Dinner with Ouija, who was a sensationalist as a photographer, and another person I was very interested in for a while was Jacob Riis, who was a muckraker. But that's sensationalism and muckraking, not concerned photography, which I felt had difficulties with its ameliorative program, with its desire to dignify poverty, dignify old age, dignify addiction. These aren't dignified conditions. They don't end well. And I thought that I could comment on
that. Riis's projects were also part of programs of social change, to point out certain kinds of derelict housing conditions, Lower East Side, Manhattan. You're creating pictures of people and living environments that are mostly unseen. I mean, you just never see this on national broadcast news. It's never, you don't see this as oh, here's a picture of Canada. This is what Canada is like, Do you feel that your project is also shares with Riis's work a certain quality of this sort of pointing out, this underlying, this questioning? Why are things like this?
It was, no, not directly, Mike. I think that I established tried to establish a sort of laboratory where you could look at this stuff but not necessarily, and begin to think about it differently. I mean, that's why I got involved with video, because I could put myself in the midst of a problem, and there was the kind of that's what happens with Ouija. I become a caregiver and a videographer at the same time, and it's reflexive in that sense. And I wanted to put myself in the middle of what I was making, which I did not think was always done by certain kinds of what you call concerned photography.
Mm-hmm. You've described yourself to me even recently as a visitor, someone who goes visiting people, and that when you go to visit, one of the keynotes of those visits is having a look at the fridge. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I'm a kind of professional visitor, yes, and that has a history of its own. Part of it goes back to how I was brought up, really, which we could talk about in a moment. But I am a professional visitor, and I come with a camera and when I walk in, I like to find out what people are doing. And I always like refrigerators because they have a sort of coffin-like aspect. And looking inside them is an act of revelation. But even that's a kind of, it's not dependable, of course. It may just be full of lemons and onions, which have nothing to do with the person you're looking at. But it's
sometimes can you tell me about some of the great, I don't know, like revelatory fridge moments you've had? You had a few, I think, and they show up in your work with some regularity.
Yeah. Well, I had to. Yes, I would often post people beside the refrigerators, holding up things from inside the refrigerator or posing beside them. One of my major subject in Pretty Ribbons, Nettie Harris, is in a very good picture of her standing beside her refrigerator. And I shot her beside a refrigerator twice, once fully clothed and once naked. Fully clothed, and then about 4 or 5 years later, naked, when we were working on Pretty Ribbons. And it's a very it's a very evocative and yet very evocative picture.
Nettie Harris is the subject of your first videotape, A Prayer for Nettie, in '95. Can you talk about your relationship and why the video? You'd made many photographs with her, but was it was something the photographs didn't get to, or?
Well, they didn't. I made Pretty Ribbons, and I began to think of photography as rather mute, and that's why I mentioned this earlier about getting involved with video, because I could insert myself into the midst of the action that I was photographing or videotaping with more fluidity. And Nettie died, and I had begun shooting some tape with her at the end of her life. And I took that tape and then strung together a group of interviews with people that had worked with her, and made A Prayer for Nettie from that material. And it was an elegy, really, for Nettie, a grotesque elegy.
You made your first movie in 1968. It was called Tennessee Street. Could you talk about how it was made and how you showed it? And why did it take 30 years before you could start making videos?
Well, it was shot on an 8mm film, and it was there were 8 minutes of film, and there was 3 hours of sound. And the 8 minutes of film showed on a loop, and the soundtrack played till it was over. A bit taxing for the audience. It was my first installation, so I took it on a little tour where it wasn't always well received. I don't even know where that piece is anymore. It's lost.
Alas.
But it, I mention it sometimes because it was, I continued to work with image and sound afterward. It had a lot of influence on me. I like that. And the reason that the third section of Reality and Motive has soundtracks in it is relates directly back to that experience I had in the late 60s with that piece. So it was a part of my learning curve. But it didn't infect me with a desire to make more at that particular time. And I had other things on my mind.
I think your brother Julian has been very important in your work. You've made several tapes where his haunting sort of returns. For instance, in your second tape, Cut the Parrot in 1996, or in Locks Away from 2003. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking about your brother and his influence on your life and your work.
Well, look, Julian does appear in in a few of my pieces, but he's many of the characters in my videos, to my mind anyway, are sort of proxies for my brother. My brother was handicapped, is handicapped. He has a lot of other physical issues, which led to a long life of institutionalization, which had and continues to have a very large influence on me. When I was young, it began to expose me to the way that people look away from subjects like my brother, and I was curious about that. I was also very curious about the way that my parents dealt with him, and the way that we used to go to visit him, and that's when I got my first start as a visitor, and I got very used to institutions and the people that inhabited them. As I got older, I began to think of why they were there and how our society deals with people that don't fit, and often they lock them up. And it's, it's so I was drawn to how different ways that we care for each other in a way, and certainly in the video program, back to that, Shelter is about that, Rap is about that. In fact, Seven Wonders of the World at the end of the program, my most recent piece, is very much about that. The character in Shelter is a man in a bus shelter who has been hit by a cab. At least that's what he told me. And it gave me the opportunity to make a single take video engagement with him, where I appeared to make fun of him, and then I just left him. All a bit of an illusion, but it makes a tight little video that I think.
Why was it important?
Well, because I was trying to tease out some of the things that people find attractive about a narrative documentary, and run against them. So I cast myself in in a position of a careless observer who didn't want anything to do with a problem that they'd encountered and tried to get away from it.
Oh, such nice guitar.
Yeah, that means something.
Must be 7:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Is
is.
it? Yes, it
We're
is
halfway
7:30.
Some of your photos and video works are, to use this overused word, shocking. They show bodies in distress, bodies close to death, aging and decaying bodies. Your camera stays very often very close, staring, unable to look away. Our genius pal Jean Perret named one of your works iconoclastic and brutal. I'd like to read this quote by, is it your favorite author on photography? Susan Sontag. I use the word favorite, ironically, of course. To suffer is one thing. This is Sontag. To suffer is one thing. Another thing is living with the photographed images of suffering, which does not necessarily strengthen conscience and the ability to be compassionate. It can also corrupt them. Once one has seen such images, one has started down the road of seeing more and more. Images anesthetize.
That's from On Photography in the 70s.
Yes, it is. 1977, yes.
Doesn't she change that? Doesn't she develop over time?
Yes, in fact,
Doesn't
she does. I was just wondering.
Yes. Yes, because that's a very undeveloped set of quote. And Sontag was capable of advancing her thinking. And I think she did come up with a more nuanced view than that one later. Did she not?
Yes, I'm just wondering about your response in relation to your own work, about like if someone, for instance, would level such a critique, do you feel that your images anesthetize us from experience?
No, not at all. I go out of my way to not let that happen.
Do we continue with the Sontag? No. Colin Kane, a year older than you, was involved just a little bit in your photography, but became very important in your video work. Erratic Angel, for instance, a nearly hour-long work made in 1998, is a very smoothly filmed portrait of Colin, who appears as a bruised, no-nonsense, extremely articulate, thoughtful guy who makes the most of your video pulpit. Your friendship, this movie, which is a portrait of Colin, I feel it's also a portrait of your friendship, of your relationship, your closeness and intimacy, shines through every frame. I wonder if you could talk about how this project developed and how you worked together.
Well, I knew Colin over a period of 20, 30 years, probably 25. Let's take the middle. Colin was part of a bar and tavern culture that I was introduced to when I first came to Montreal. And he appeared in some of my early photographs. I didn't photograph him a lot then because he had a beard, and I don't really like photographing people with beards. It gets in the way of their facial characteristics, which I think are important. He appears in Erratic Angel as himself, and he's allowed to carry the weight of the film with a critique of the healthcare system, which he was a part of at that time. Later, the next piece I did with him was called If Only I, and its central character was a woman named Colleen, who Colin was involved with and brought to me one day to make a video about her and her circumstances, which were traumatic at the time. She'd been kicked out of the home that she was living in, and Colin had taken her in. And then again, he was in My Dinner with Ouija as...
Can you just roll back, like how, could you just roll back to that situation? So how, what's the relationship between like the dire circumstance, the new circumstance, making the videotape? Was the videotape, it was something that was going to help somehow? Or there was a story that needed to be told from her side, from Colleen's side? Or could you just talk about why were you called? You were called into this situation, you know? Why exactly?
Well, Colin wanted to help her. He thought that
Yes.
thought that I could make something that would help her.
Because appearing in a video would be empowering, or?
But possibly. I don't think it didn't work in a predictable fashion. I don't know whether the end product worked in the way that Colin had imagined it working, but it did lead to Colleen regaining enough confidence to appear before a board of doctors and get released from what they call in Quebec the curatorship, and regain her rights as an individual. And it made it possible for her to rent her own apartment and to actually separate from Colin and rebuild her life. And I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't made the video.
When you're making a video, I'm assuming you're not mapping out like the 6-week shooting schedule. Monday's going to be like this. So what does a shoot look like, or what do you just make an arrangement on that day to come over, or do you pop by unannounced, or what happens? And
well, I guess it varies a bit, but I just throw myself into a situation. Like I don't. I've built scripts of my videos, but they're reverse engineered scripts, and I never have a script.
They come after.
I have a kind of they come after, and I don't shoot from them. So I may be attracted to a certain person or the circumstances they're living in, and I just begin to spend time with them. And sometimes I don't know why I'm there. It takes me a while to discover that, but I find that a very volatile set of circumstances. There's a certain point in the process where I shoot something that becomes the core of the video.
Though you won't know that until later.
No, I won't know till I shoot it. That's right. So the whole situation is very flexible and open to accident.
Could you
false starts?
Could you talk about one of these moments that's, you know, when you say like, so this is really the core of the matter right here. Could you talk about one of those moments in any of your tapes?
I think if we stick to the tapes that we're going to see in the program that Videograph has put together, there was I began talking with Marty Corbin, who was the central figure in Ouija, just kind of randomly about his experiences with some of his colleagues in the 50s. We reached a point one day where we were talking about Vietnam, and we had an exchange which I thought captured some of my residual anger and some of Marty's frustration with the country that we were both exiles from. And that was the point where I began to build video around that. And then some accidents happened. Marty was alcoholic. He lost his grip on his addiction, and I don't go away when things twist. And I shot all through that period of heavy drinking and made it a part of the video. Marty called the video, when he finally saw it, his last radical act. He thought it was a cautionary tale. No.
Uh-huh. Would he ever ask to see the footage as it's being developed?
No, he didn't. I showed it all to him after I put together a rough cut.
Uh-huh.
And we sat down with about an hour and a half of stuff and looked at it. He needed to see it. He needed to see it, and he did.
Why do you say that he needed to see it?
Well, because some of it was very difficult. I mean, Marty didn't look very good. He was drinking too much. We were having arguments about booze, and Marty was trying to get in a detox program and failing to. His life was coming to pieces. There's a balance in the video with Marty completely sober, talking about his past and his politics and his attitude towards life, which is, a counterweight to the parts of the video that deal with his addiction and the kind of behavior that resulted from it. He needed to see all that.
Uh-huh. And there was never a point, or were you concerned at all that he would say, or I wonder about other subjects, Nettie, or, they go like, oh, but can't you just make me beautiful? Like, can't you make...
Yeah, I suppose.
Like, that's too much. Like, please, not that. Not that one with me, like, naked singing, and I look so terrible, whatever, I'm so drunk, at that moment, I don't know what I'm doing. Could you please not use that? I don't know. Would you get these requests?
No. Very rarely, Mike. I work with people that are not ashamed of themselves. They take responsibility for their lives, and they're not shy about it. Certainly Nettie wasn't shy about getting old. Marty wasn't shy about being a drunkard either. They thought there was some sense in being old, like Nettie was, and speaking to it and from it the way she did. She had her own agenda. She was kind of from my perspective, a Victorian rebel that was talking to her own class and trying to give them another version of what life could be like. And some of the facts that they tried to deny within their own lives, facts that they were not comfortable looking at, as I mentioned before. So I guess you could say that Marty and Nettie, in this case, were people that didn't look away.
Uh-huh.
And that really intrigued me.
I think it's a deep characteristic of your own work. I mean, I think there's very difficult situations and people in whose lives are, as you say, like they're unraveling right in front of us, and you're really refusing to look away. It says something about certain questions of decorum, modesty, what usually passes for like a public face or a public picture, how we should be presenting ourselves or should be presenting others. And so much of your work feels like it's taking apart those conventions.
Well, I believe that's correct. That's one of my intentions.
Oh, it's almost that time. Once when I was visiting you, you told me a story about a suitcase. You'd received this mysterious suitcase. I think it was just placed on your doorstep or something. You woke up one morning, it was there. Could you tell us that story? What is that suitcase? And why was it that you couldn't open it for an entire year?
2 years, actually, Mike.
2 years.
Yeah. The suitcase belonged to a friend of mine who was also a photographer, and it was full of his photographs. And I inherited it by accident. We had been close with each other in the 70s, and we'd eventually disagreed over something, which is not necessary to go into here, but we lost touch with each other. And he left Montreal and moved to Hong Kong, where he died. The suitcase he left behind with a mutual friend of ours. And when she moved, she phoned me and asked me if I wanted it, because, as she put it, I think you're still interested in photography. So she brought me the suitcase. And I knew it was a kind of Pandora's box, emotionally, certainly, because David had taken pictures of our lives during the 70s. And it was full of people that I knew very well. But it also had some surprises for me, because it turned out that David and I had photographed some of the same subjects unknown to each other. And I was flabbergasted at, take one case in point. There was a guy I photographed quite a bit with a refrigerator and the food in it. And we took some good pictures, but he was very shy, and I had a difficult time working with him. I was successful in the end, but I was left feeling that I'd been very fortunate to kind of get as close to him as I had. I opened the suitcase and I found that David had gotten extremely close to him, and he'd just put an ad in the newspaper. And this guy had turned up to be in the movies. And there was a side of him that I was not at play when I was involved with him. And I was just I was surprised with the Jekyll Hyde aspects of this person. And I've discovered that several other places in the suitcase. So I ended up making a book called Out of Kerr's Suitcase, about mixing David's work with my work, not attributed to either one of us. I kind of ran them together, and and I made a video about it too, with some of the characters in the suitcase that were still alive. One, a male going through the suitcase with me, shooting him, and the other, a female, going through the book that I made that had her pictures in it.
I just want to ask Marianne,
Yeah.
Are there questions from other people that they would like to chime in?
Well, not for now. I had prepared a few, but if you had some questions you would like to continue asking, we can do that as well while the public gets started.
Oh, okay.
As you prefer. I can ask some questions if you like.
Let me see. Could you tell us something? I need to go to the bathroom, so I was really hoping that somebody would ask a question, but I'll just ask something and then I'll go and come back. I'm sure you'll be very witty and sharp. Nelson Coombs has been an important person in your life. Could you tell a story about how you met?
How I met Nelson?
Yes.
Oh, I met him on the street. He was pulling a child's wagon full of rotten tomatoes home from a market. And he was going to make his spaghetti sauce. And he was very pleased with himself because he bought them for practically nothing. And we started to talk, and I liked the way he looked.
You just approached him cold.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yes, yes. And
Did you do that often?
Yeah, frequently. Yes.
You would just walk up to people and start talking to them.
Start talking with them. Yes.
Uh-huh. Sorry. Yes.
No, it's fine.
Spaghetti sauce.
Yeah, spaghetti sauce. And I got involved with Nelson because he had a very energetic relationship with everything about his life. He was a big collector, a collector of stuff off the street. And one of his favorite times of year was Christmas. And he used to decorate his apartment. And I became his photographer for his Christmas decorations originally. And then for whenever he had a birthday party or a get together with friends, he'd call me and I'd come over and take pictures of everybody. Nelson was one of the most volatile people like that. But many of the people that I ended up working with shared some aspects of Nelson's ideas about themselves and what they enjoyed and how they wanted to be seen by other people. So I was their court photographer.
All right.
Nelson is such.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. Okay.
Mike,
Sorry. Do you have a question? Or...
Yeah, I have a question from someone from the public. So, Donigan, are you planning a new video?
No, not at this time.
Not at this time. I have a question for you, Mike.
No.
Do you think there are any parallels between your work and Donigan's?
Mike is not there right now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, then again, I'm gonna ask you another question. So, then again, does your work can be seen as a political statement? And if so, what is that statement?
Yeah, it's political. It's a somewhat left-wing statement about caring about each other. It's I'm an eco-socialist.
Perfect. So it is political.
Yes.
And when you came to Canada, why did you choose to come to Montreal, let's say, instead of Toronto or another city?
I thought that it would it was close. It was easier to fly here than Toronto, but that's not the exact answer. I think that it was practical in the sense that I had a car, which I wanted to bring here, and I met someone who was moving to Canada themselves, and they were going to settle in Montreal. So we both ended up coming here, and I grew to like Montreal, and I just stayed.
And Mike, I have a question for you if you're ready. Do you think there are any parallels? Yeah, okay, perfect. So do you think there are any parallels between your work and the one of Donigan's?
My feeling when I'm looking at Donigan's work is that it's part of an ongoing practice and investigation. It's not like, here it is, this is everything, period, you know? So there's some sense of that something is ongoing, something is in process. And as a viewer, I'm invited to be part of that ongoingness. I think it's great that there is an exhibition, you know, that'll be on for the next few months that will at least take a cursory look, like a look across, you know, different works, and inviting us to find some of those through lines and some of the discontinuity as well. I think we both share a sense of engagement and interest in portraiture, actually.
And then again, when you finish a project, do you find that you miss your subject, almost like a grief of some kind?
Well, I'm hard to get rid of, Marion. So I never really lose them. I follow them to the end. So I miss them when they're dead. Yes, I do. My world has gotten smaller over the past 15 years. I've lost some very important people that I worked with, and I'm sad about that. Grief-stricken sometimes, yeah. I miss them.
Yeah, because they're your friends.
I'm thinking about this.
Not only,
Well, I don't always consider them my friends, Marion. Some of them become my friends, but it never started out like that. Our arrangement was very practical in the beginning. It was defined by pretty clear arrangements with each other that were attractive because of some of the services I was able to provide for them, or the money I paid them. If you spend time working with people for a long time, it becomes more intense, and you get locked into their lives more tightly, and then a kind of affection builds up, certainly.
I have a question for you, Mike. What is your favorite work of Donigan and why?
I can't remember what it's called, of course, as usual, but it's a kind of a greatest hits movie. It offers very short, hard fragments. It's like walking over broken glass, feeling that everyone should go through at least once a year, maybe at Christmas time. It's about 18 minutes long, I think. And maybe I'm mistaken entirely about this, but I am misremembering a story that you told me, Donigan, once. I think that you were, I don't know, like, that there was a certain random quality in the choice of the time of the exact clips, that were being chosen for this movie. What is this movie? It's called Fountain. No?
That's right, Fountain. Yeah. Yes, it's
okay.
called
Yeah,
Fountain.
Fountain, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Armut. Thank you. And how were the selections made exactly? It was, you closed your eyes, you hit the fast forward button, zingo, that one, or something.
Well, not quite, Mike. I just built a little system for getting through all of the tape that I'd shot up to the point of Fountain's making, and I started out.
How much was that?
I wanted to make a book about 150 hours, something like that, I guess, approximately.
Okay.
And I was going to make a book of video stills, and to get engaged with the material in a kind of coherent and efficient way, I thought that I needed 500 pictures to edit a book down from. Maybe I'd end up with using 150 of them. And so I divided that number into the amount of hours that I'd shot, and I came up with 17 minutes and some odd seconds. So I started chronologically with the tapes, and I just would stop every 17 minutes, etc. And my rule was that I would choose an image 30 frames on either side. And that's how I chose the initial few hundred pictures. There were some adjustments, of course, but it was systemized random behavior. I mean, I had a system, but I accepted where I landed. That's how the book was built. That's how the video was built, because each one of those clips came with a soundtrack, and I realized that I could make something that might work very well if I put them all together. And that's what I did. So that's how Fountain was made. That's how the video was made. It was
Nice.
I have maybe a last questions if you're up to it. So Donigan, what role does background sound or music play in telling the stories in your videos?
Not very much, usually. I think that it's music ends up in my videos is usually a mood enhancer more than a narrative, rather than driving a narrative. So my relationship with some of the music is emotional. It's not meant to tell a story at all. It's meant to just flavor the action.
Perfect.
Ryan,
Well,
we have to. I think we should say goodbye. How should we say goodbye exactly? What should
well,
we do?
first of all, I wanna say thank you to you, Mike, and then again for this wonderful discussions. It was really really interesting. And for the public, the program and the new publication on Donigan's coming work is on VTech, so you can go on VTech and watch it right now if you like.
VTech, how do they get to there? How do they get there? Oh, there'll be a link in the chat section or something, or on Videograph's website.
The website, or you can go on the Facebook events too.
The Videograph website, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and well, I hope we can do that another time.
Oh yeah.
Great.
Let's do it every week.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Every week.
Good night,
Okay.
Marion.
Thanks for everything.
Mike. Yeah,
Okay.
thank
Good
you,
night.
Mike.
Good night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.